welcome back. You're still watching us here on the breakfast show this morning. It's time to take a look at the press segment and the banners on the main newspapers in Egypt. We're very much also delighted to have joining us here in the studio to shed more light and a further analysis into these articles is Madam Nefisa El Sabagh, Editor-in-Chief at Masriya, and also journalist. Thank you very much for joining us this morning, Madam. Let's start off with the Al-Ahram newspaper. Of course, Japan Crown Prince Naruhito Ahito, if I pronounce that right, received President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi at the Imperial Palace in the Japanese capital of Tokyo. And of course, this is part of the Asian tour the President is holding currently. Took him to Kazakhstan, Japan, and today possibly to Korea. And they've had a lot of issues that they've discussed, many mutual interests between Japan and Egypt. But what can you tell us about the main highlight of this meeting with the Crown Prince of Japan?
Basically, it was the visit in general. It's not only this meeting. It concentrated in two different issues. The major one is economic cooperation, and the second point is fighting terrorism. It's part of the new interests arising in Japan after the killing of the Japanese victims by Daesh. So it basically was these two issues. So many different kinds of agreements had been signed between Egypt and Japan. Especially in the field of power and in the field of education. Those are two very important fields to Egypt to get much experience, more experience from the Japanese experiment. So it's the major issues. Actually, many agreements have been signed yesterday as well, such as the initial cooperation between Egypt and Mitsubishi and Toyota to invest in Egypt. So basically,
yes, it was a successful trip. We also have a lot of, we're going to be talking about more in depth of what were these agreements that were signed between both countries. But I asked to go out for this report to brief us on the trip of President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, which took him to Japan.
President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi met with the Japanese Crown Prince Naruhito Akihito for talks and means of boosting bilateral relations and issues of mutual concern. Prince Naruhito held a lunch banquet to honor President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and the accompanying delegation in the Palace of the Emperor. Earlier, the President met with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, as well as a number of heads of Japanese companies to discuss investment opportunities in Egypt. The meetings included talks with the CEO of Mitsubishi Trade Company and the CEO of the Toyota Company. The President also met with the Egyptian sumo champion Abdulrahman Sha'lan, who enjoys a wide popularity in Japan. The talks covered means of capitalizing on his popularity to encourage the flow of Japanese tourists to Egypt. After talks with Abe on Monday, President el-Sisi and the Japanese Prime Minister witnessed the signing of a number of cooperation agreements in the fields of energy and electricity between the two countries, which worth 2 trillion yen. The President's visit to Japan is part of the three-nation tour in Asia that took him to Kazakhstan and will take him to South Korea.
All right, welcome back. You're still watching us here on The Breakfast Show, and we are also joined with Madam Nefisa El Sabagh. And let's go to Al-Ahram Online, a very similar article that also talks about the presidency's tour to the Asian region, particularly in Japan. One of the agreements, one of the three concessional loan agreements with the Japan International Cooperation Agency and between the Minister of International Cooperation, or the Ministry of the International Cooperation, which is worth more than $450 million to finance projects in the fields of energy and transport sectors. We also have scholarships for 2,500 Egyptian students annually and interns for 5 years in order to develop Egyptian human resources and enhance their skills. There's, of course, this is as part of the aim of sending 100,000 Egyptian students to study in Japan. In general, we also have loan agreements including $155 million loan to expand Egypt's Burj Al Arab airport, located 50 kilometers southwest of Alexandria. So there was a number of agreements. We're talking about different sectors. We're talking about millions of dollars. Not only that, but also the president was very careful in learning or taking the role model of the education in Japan and invest in it here. How do you see that?
So, as for the many investments or loans have been agreed, it's easier for Japan to sign such agreements because the international economic recession or the start of this recession or the fear is not hitting Japan that much as many other countries. So Japan economically is very stable and strong. So it was actually part of the target why to head to Japan, especially, of course, besides making so many differentiating the different kind of relations for Egypt, the international relations. It's basically, the other point is because of the economic situation of Japan. The other point about the role model of Japan, I think it's very crucial to bring here part of the Japanese experience, especially in education, if you want really to achieve success during the coming years and decades. We have to have a look and reshape our educational system. It's a very crucial issue. So all those investment would just go in vain if we do not have the human resource to do it, if we do not have the policy to fight corruption with it. And actually this is very important.
And kill bureaucracy as well, that is constraining such investments from taking place smoothly.
And basically, actually, this bureaucracy is the thing that's protecting corruption as well and making a way for it. So it's very important to have a different experience from there and really apply it, turn it into internal policies in Egypt.
Yes. Let's move again to another article, also still with Al Ahram Online. We read the Prime Minister Sharif Ismail has said his government will present its strategy program to the Parliament during the second half of March, and the government can only remain in power if its policy program is approved by the Parliament. And he also spoke about the aim of this policy program in achieving social justice and overhauling the country's administrative sector with a special focus on education, health, and transportation as well. Now, under the Egyptian constitution, the parliament is required to endorse the current government's agenda, and if it does not win the chamber's trust, the party or the coalition of the largest parliamentary bloc has to name a new government to head. We do understand that this critical phase that Egypt is going through is very difficult for any person, no matter how well experienced he is, to be able to cope with the amount of obstacles and barriers and problems that need resolving. However, the fact on ground, and according to the constitution that we all abide with, what's right has to take place. So if the government does not submit a very solid initiative or program to the parliament by mid-March, most likely it will leave. What do you think would be the circumstances that this government would need to stay?
To me, actually, basically, if these governments need to stay, I'm not that very keen to see the same government again. It's basically what's very much needed in Egypt is to have an overall policy in different sectors. We do not have an overall policy in different sectors. For example, we cannot understand what kind of policy regarding education do we have. I'm not talking about the day-to-day decisions. I'm talking about the overall long-term policies, short and long-term policies that actually draw the way where we are heading through.
Do you think maybe this is the reason, one of the reasons could be, Madam, is the fact that people who come into this kind of leading power know that they will not be staying except for a very temporary period, and anybody who comes after them always says, well, I'm not going to look at the past, I'm starting my own policy, and making new policies every 2 years or every so and so time. It's not really convenient.
This is the rule of the presidency here. So I think what's needed, let's have a look at any other country, the United States or Britain or France. There is a policy for the country regarding the basic issues, for example, regarding the kind of economy they are having, the kind of education, which kind of services are being submitted or provided to the citizens, and which is kind is being paid for or whatever. So there are some general limits for policies to have them, and any government that comes normally abide to those policies and have some areas of different trends in some other more minor issues. For example, the international relation. So if we have a look at what's happening, we can see that there is a certain clear policy regarding international relations. But internally, there is no clear policy regarding any file. So I think if the president had drew some kind of policies regarding whatever files, any upcoming government, whether this government or the next government, would abide to it.
Absolutely. Let's go to Al Shuruk newspaper, and Tourism Minister Hisham Zazoua expressed hope that the United Kingdom will resume its flight to Egypt very soon. Zazoua added that he is negotiating closely with the British officials over the issue, and the Daily Mail reported that EasyJet will be resuming the flights by the end of May if the UK government lifts the travel ban to Egypt. It is very sad to see how, internationally there is pressure on Egypt in terms of banning flights and so forth, and it's also sad how that is affecting the true image or the current circumstances of tourism in Egypt in general. And I don't know what, but again, maybe from where you ended of having a clear policy, we shouldn't depend on that. We should have a plan B, because we shouldn't wait for people to come, whether you come or not.
If we have a clear policy, by the way, I think we would have avoided some of these circumstances. For example, Russia is not banning its tourists from Egypt, or is not banning the flights to Egypt because they are. I'm just going to continue. It's not the reason because they have fights with Egyptian, or they have conflicts and interests with Egypt. It's basically because a mistake that had been occurred here. I think the major issue was how Egyptian officials tackled with the incident of the plane crash, for example. All the time they did not give any clear response, or they did not show a will to shoulder responsibility about whatever would happen. I'm not saying just to go and admit whatever is being said, but at least go out and declare it very frankly that if there is any mistake, we would shoulder it and we would solve it. This did not happen, and we stayed for months actually just refusing to say anything till President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi declared it in his very last speech, that there had something to do with terrorists in this plane crash. So this kind of, there is no clear policy, there is no officials who are frank and clear enough and straight to the point that made a very close country such as Russia to prevent its planes from coming in here.
Yes.
So I think basically, again and again, it's number one to have clear policy, and that would show the world that we we have this kind of limits and we have this kind of orientations.
Yes, and this kind of clear vision that will be also
exactly. So the kind
implemented accurately. Yes, absolutely. And I would like to, because we are running really short of time, quickly move to Al-Waqt newspaper. Let's take a look at Egypt's benchmark and its stock market and the performance of the stock market after this report. But before we go out of this report, I'd like to thank you once again very much, Madam Nefisa El Sabagh, Editor-in-Chief at Masriyat, and also journalist. Thank you very much for joining us. Stay tuned.